I don't even think children are afraid of you.
Welcome to Overwatch, and welcome to the patch notes roundup for the February 9th beta patch. Now, the beta came back online on this date, and it came with it a huge number of changes, and we're going to go through them in excruciating detail. I've had a chance to play with a lot of the changes and get my initial impressions on them, and we're going to go through them in order of significance, or at least what I think is most significant, and then go from there. We're going to be focusing mostly in this video on the hero changes. For the new map mode, I will be showing footage of that in the background. Of course, you can watch me play Pharah as I just talk about the changes to the game, but I'll be holding off on giving my full opinions on that until I've had a few more chances to play it. Currently, I've only managed to play on the maps once a piece. One of those maps was against the full team of Melty, who are currently the European #1 pro team. So as you can imagine, that didn't go very well. Now, there's a huge wealth of user interface changes and system changes as well that's gone into the game. I think I'll have a separate video on those. I'll go into that sometime soon as well. But I want to look at the gameplay, the actual core game, and then consider how things are going to be changing in the near future. And by far the biggest change in my opinion, it's absolutely enormous. I don't think people quite understand how absolutely pivotal this change is. It's the change to the ultimate charge system. So, let me read off the patch note. Ultimate charge, all heroes. Players no longer gain ultimate charge from taking damage. Ultimate charge will now generate slowly over time for all heroes. To accommodate these changes, many heroes' ultimate costs have been rebalanced. Now, there's also a dev comment attached to this, which is great, so let me just get that out there for you as well, so that we can hear the dev's justification for this. Allowing heroes to generate ultimate charge when taking damage created several balance issues. For example, it was often a bad idea to attack an enemy hero if they were being healed, since that would charge at the enemy's ultimate, and their healer's ultimate much more quickly. To help address these issues, we've removed the ability for damage taken to generate ultimate charge and made it so all heroes will now generate ultimate charge at a slow and consistent rate. Tanks are a little bit weaker, or at least a little bit different. I've really noticed this when playing Zarya, the few times I've played it since the beta's come back up. She feels incredibly different now. Like, the ability to build up your ultimate is so tied to your ability to deal out damage, so if you don't manage to get high charge on Zarya, you are really going to struggle to get that first ultimate up and running. Of course, if you do get high charge, then you will be able to build up fairly quickly, but Zarya's ability to sort of tank and just keep regenning through her shields is so pivotal for her getting easy ultimates out. It's also, in my opinion, probably a really big nerf to Winston as well, simply because Winston, if he was killed twice, he'd get an ultimate. Like, 1,000 damage is enough to give Winston his ultimate, or at least it used to be. Now, however, Winston has to rely on dealing damage, and that's a lot harder for him. That being said, I think the fact that the ultimate charge now generates slowly for all heroes, I don't know if it's the same rate or if it's different rates for different heroes. And I think Winston will be a case, for example, where the ultimate building up slowly a little bit faster than, say, Pharah or Soldier 76. That would make sense. So it does give them a little dial to tweak, and it does eliminate the balance problem that they were talking about, where you would have a trade basically happens, right? Every single time you dealt damage in the previous version of the game, you were getting a trade out of it. You were trading, they were trading hit points, and then they were getting ultimate and you were getting ultimate. And you had to be careful with people like, especially powerful heroes like Reinhardt. When you do core damage to Reinhardt, you were giving him this really big game-changing ultimate. Of course, that was slightly changed, and we'll go into that later. How this will shake out is, honestly, really hard to tell. Like, this is a really big change, and it does remove a lot of the kind of swing-back mechanic that getting killed used to have, where you would die, but you would have a boatload of ultimate charge as a result because you took a load of damage. Now, of course, dying isn't ideal. Ideally, you would drop low and then heal up, or you would just be dealing damage, but, you are going to take damage in these games. So I'll be curious to see if there's any major changes to how people play at the highest level and how they consider dealing damage. Like, Junkrat, for example, is going to be so much stronger now, because Junkrat had a real problem where he had no finishing power. He would just deal damage, and if the enemy team has a Lucio, they'd all stay near each other, and Junkrat's damage would never outstrip Lucio's healing, so you would just be providing them ultimate. That problem is gone. So now you could have Junkrat, for example, open as an option to deal with clumped groups. You also have, just minor damage in general is more impactful. It feels less like you're losing out for just dealing non-fatal damage. So overall, I quite like the change. I think it opens up more sort of chip damage, as you know, if that makes sense. It's a fighting game term, but I think it kind of works here. And at the highest level, it'll make the game less easy, I guess. Like, the problem at the highest level was dealing damage. You had to be going for kills. If you couldn't get a kill, you were just giving the enemy team resources. That is now gone. That crutch is gone. And at the lowest levels, I don't think it will really matter that much. So I think this change is good. I think the ultimate charge generating slowly is just to sort of bring the lower levels back up. The charge generation is really slow. Like, you'll get one ultimate if you don't actually build charge on your own, probably, in a 10-minute game. So don't worry too much about that. Another really big change, and this is more for people like Soldier 76, Roadhog, Tracer, I think, as well. Actually, not so much Tracer, but Roadhog and Soldier 76 certainly spring to mind when I read this change. Junkrat as well, to be honest. Ammo will now reload in the middle of a weapon's reload animation instead of at the end of it. Now, you used to have a problem. There was like a quality of life issue, especially, and again, Junkrat and Roadhog were notorious for this, where you would start reloading, and the reload animation is quite long for both of them. Soldier 76 had this problem as well. And then you would use an ability midway because you had to, you had to do something. You had to throw a hook, or you had to throw a bomb, or fire helix rockets. And that would cancel your reload animation. And even if you were right near the end of the animation, you still had to do the full reload animation once again. And it just felt really clunky and really bad for those heroes. It also did it with melee. Melee would suddenly stop your reloads. So now it's a little bit more dynamic, it's a little bit faster, the reload is a little bit quicker. And that's really nice. Also, the way that this is phrased has me questioning whether reload cancelling is kind of a thing, where as Roadhog or Junkrat you could, cancel your reload animation halfway through and still get the ammo. So I'm curious to see if there's an optimization you can find there. I'll be experimenting around with that and let you guys know if I can find anything. Next really big change, all healing effects now work on shields. This is a huge buff to Zarya, and a pretty big buff to SYMMETRA as well. Like, it just makes SYMMETRA that much more powerful. It's kind of crazy. It really is kind of crazy, and I'm curious to see why this happened. I think this might be to solve the issue where you were healing someone and then the hit bar would stop at like halfway, and you couldn't figure out why, and maybe they couldn't figure out a good way of making that readily readable. So maybe that's why this change is in there. The big question I have now is SYMMETRA too strong? Like, now that healing can work on shields, does healing work on her shields? I need to test that out. I will be testing that out, and I'll let you guys know as well. Again, this is like very preliminary, but these are just my thoughts and feelings so far. And a lot of this still needs figuring out, to be honest. I'll otherwise just go over the rest of the general changes just while we are here. Muzzle flash has been changed for several weapons. I haven't looked too hard at this, but in general, like sounds, ability colors, things like that seem a lot better. Several adjustments have been made to the in-combat audio. Healing is definitely easier to figure out. Like, you get a very, very clear audio cue when you're being healed. It's quite loud. It sort of winds up as you're getting picked up. So that's quite nice to have. Explosions also have a lot more bass to them. Pharah's ultimate sounds devastating now. It sounds absolutely incredible. It's really got a heavy bass boom to it, and it's beautiful. Otherwise, let's talk hero changes. Now, TORBJÖRN was changed, and he was changed very dramatically. He's where we're going to start, because new TORBJÖRN is hilarious. He is absolutely hilarious. Bottom line of what they've done, I'll put the changes up on screen, but basically, turrets are now free. They are completely free. You drop a level 1 turret, you upgrade it to level 2, you can do all that for free. The turrets are also a little bit more powerful, but they have less health. So they're a bit more made out of glass, they're a bit more disposable. This is what they want now. They want the turrets to be something you throw up and then you go fighting, because TORBJÖRN's damage has also been hugely increased. So his primary fire is up by 25%, his alternate fire is up by 50%. Now, his alternate fire actually has a really slow fire rate as well, but at close range it can just murder people. And his primary fire does a huge amount of damage if you can land the hits. I've played a few games with the new TORBJÖRN, and I can tell you he plays completely differently now. You basically put the turret up and then you go fighting, and this is how I envisioned TORBJÖRN back when I did my character analysis for him way back when, but it turned out it was just better to sort of camp the turret. You weren't effective enough to go fighting. Now it feels like he's in the right place, where you put the turret up and you go fighting. The turret is powerful enough to really quickly deal with people like Genji, like Tracer, and it's disposable enough where if it goes down, you don't feel like you're at a huge disadvantage. You can just quickly rebuild it somewhere else and still be a threat. Also, it means that building up scrap and then throwing out armor is actually a lot easier because you can pick up so much of it. You are out fighting, you pick up a lot more scrap, and you throw out loads of armor. And generally, when I've been playing him, I've just had armor packs all over the battlefield for people to pick up. Like, I've had too many almost. And that feels quite nice because it's like having, you know, health packs for people to use. And it makes him a nice utility pick. It's really good against Tracer, it's really good against Genji. He's good against the heroes, he should be good against the flankers who are kind of squishy and can't really do much. Molten Core has been changed to be insane. So now when he uses Molten Core, he doesn't get a free shitload of scrap. Like, he doesn't get that. But it makes his turrets go to level 3, it gives him the huge amount of armor it used to. And the level 3 turret is now just insanely high power. So what Molten Core is essentially, you overdrive your turret and you make yourself a lot stronger. And the turret has a huge amount of health, the level 3 turret, and you have a huge amount of health. And I made the joke once that it's raid boss TORBJÖRN, because he literally becomes a raid boss for that time. It's just it's the, oh my god, the push is happening, we need to be tanky, let's be tanky, I deal a shitload of damage, come at me bro. And it forces the enemy team to try and deal with you. Of course they're going to have to deal with your other countermeasures stopping the push, so it's a really good place. Like, he feels a lot better now, he feels a lot more active, a lot more dynamic, a lot more rewarding, and I'm a lot happier with this new TORBJÖRN. Of course, it's like day 2 that the betas come back up, so he could be still complete jank. I've noticed that Pharah rockets still absolutely annihilate him, so Pharah still is a really good pick against him. Junkrat also a good pick, Reinhardt also a good pick. But when you're worrying about the turret, if you put the turret on one angle and have the other team attacking from another angle, it's a good way of dealing with Reinhardt and exposing his weaknesses. It just adds that extra layer of threat. And when you lose the turret, it's no big deal, so it feels really good. Next up is Bastion. Bastion was the next most changed hero, and it's some pretty big changes. Some pretty nasty changes actually for Bastion. So he has more health now, he has 200 hit points, 100 armor in recon form, and in recon form he's still weaker than I'd like. I'd still kind of like something for him to do in recon form that gives him a recon ability. You know, the ability to like mark a target for a short amount of time or something like that would have been nice. That's what I was kind of hoping for. But instead we just have, you know, he's just his mobile self, he just runs around, shoots people, that's fine. But now he can get into sentry form half a second faster, and that's actually pretty big. He can also turn around 360 degrees, which is pretty cool, and instead of having a barrier with 1000 hit points, he now gets 300 armor. This is big, like, it means that he doesn't have this regenerating shield in front of him that makes him really powerful from one angle, and he can just turn and kill someone who gets behind him. But he has his core, which is like a blue glowing thing on the back of him. And if you shoot him, it's basically like a super version of his head. All successful attacks against the core deal triple damage. Now this is huge, because it means he does have that back exposure weakness, but he can still turn around and deal with it, so it gives him some agency, so he can deal with threats behind him. But of course, if you turn around and deal with a tracer behind you, the enemy team pushing in the front can see your core, and if they can land a couple of shots on it, you're going down fast. It means that healing is a lot more effective on Bastion, because you can heal up his armor. It means SYMMETRA is a lot weaker against Bastion, actually, because he no longer has the barrier, and so you can't just rely on spamming through the barrier with her bubbles and killing him off quickly. And ultimately, he's also a little less damaging, like he does a little less damage, but it's a little bit tighter. So he rewards aiming a little bit better, just again, that little extra reward for a skillful player. Managing Bastion rather than just WM, well not even WM1, just M1, mouse button 1, down a corridor and killing everything. So it's a little bit better, a little bit tuned up. He's a little bit more flexible, a little bit more mobile, can react to threats better. Just, again, more active, less one-dimensional, better for the game overall. D.Va, really heavily nerfed. Well, okay, not really heavily nerfed, but actually, no, it is pretty big. D.Va's mech, when it used to be destroyed, it used to stay around for a couple of seconds, and it could be used as a shield. This would also cause all kinds of problems. So, for example, SYMMETRA's beam would stay connected to it unless you like let off the mouse button for a second and then reattached it to D.Va, which would then kill her immediately. It was amazing. TORBJÖRN's turret would still hit it, things would still impact on it, for example. It was a good tactic as D.Va when you were jettisoning out the back of the mech, you would just run behind it and sort of stay safe. Also, defense matrix has been nerfed, so now it's more of a cylinder in front of her, and it's been decreased by about 50% in terms of size, so it really is more about focused on catching specific projectile corridors, I guess, rather than just covering the entire area in front of you. Now, again, the devs have commented on this, and they've said that this is to help alleviate some of the problem when there's multiple people playing D.Va. So what would happen is, basically, D.Va would get killed, jump out the mech, and then, would hide behind a dying mech, and the other D.Vas would do the same, and they wouldn't be taking damage. It just made it harder to finish her off on an already hard-to-finish-off character, basically. Whether this will fix the issue of having multiple D.Vas at the end of the game covering each other, I don't know. I can't be sure. It will help because she's just less survivable and a bit more vulnerable to damage. So Zarya, for example, I think will be really good at dealing with that now, simply because Zarya can quickly and efficiently get to the smaller D.Vas. But other than that, I can't tell you. I think it'll also be better for Reinhardt, although Reinhardt could technically just hit straight through the mech anyway with his big wide swinging arcs. So curious to see how that's going to shake out. If it fixes the problem, I don't know, but as I said to the community team when I talked to them, this is a problem. If it happens at the competitive level, where people just spam D.Va at the end of the game, then we can fix it at the competitive level. We can make a ruling saying just don't do that shit, you can only have so many D.Vas on the field at any one time. Easy to fix. When it trickles down into public play, that's when it starts becoming a problem, and it inevitably would have. Like, basically, at the highest levels, if there was a ladder, people would do this D.Va trick not to lose. So fixing this is kind of important. It is a back burner project. I'm curious to see how this addresses that problem, and if it does address that problem. Next up for big changes, especially at the competitive level, Mercy. Really big changes. Guardian Angel can now target corpses. Basically, you can see the souls of dead allies. This links into Resurrect. Resurrect now charges faster. It activates faster. But its range has been more than halved. It only reses around 15 meters around her. This will help stop things like Mercy rezzing from the spawn, Mercy rezzing from behind walls, Mercy rezzing from, miles away, which is what she used to do. She used to pick up the entire battlefield. Now she has to get a bit closer. Thanks to Guardian Angel being able to target the souls of dead allies, you can target, the corpse-strewn battlefield and get in there and res people, but you've got to get in there and you make yourself vulnerable as the Mercy. Still an incredibly powerful ult. Still a hugely powerful ult. I'll really keep an eye on this in the future. Whether this is going to be the fix that, killed it dead, I don't think so. I think that as long as the Resurrect is instant, it's still a huge swing, it's still hugely powerful, and I don't think this is going to be enough to fully stop Mercy being like one of the picks at the highest level. But I can see it alleviating some of the pressure, I can see it alleviating some of the frustration in normal games especially. Next up, Reinhardt got a BAP with the nerf hammer, rather fittingly. Earth Shatter has been nerfed, so the damage on Earth Shatter has come down by 50% and the cone width has been decreased. On the bright side, Reinhardt can now turn while using it. Believe me, it's disorienting when you first try that, when you're so used to being locked in place. But this is pretty big. Like, the devs, again, have commented on all of these patch changes, and they've said that, Earth Shatter was intended to be a setup move, but basically Reinhardt was killing the entire enemy team on his own when using it. And yeah, he kind of was. Like, every player of the game, well, almost every player of the game at the high levels was being Reinhardt firing off his ultimate and killing 4 people. And that couldn't stay like that. Earth Shatter was already powerful enough as just a crowd control. Having it being a crowd control and a team killer is just too much. It's just too much. Especially as Reinhardt could generally find a good way and a good place to fire it off by just charging through the enemy team and then dropping the Earth Shatter behind him. This change I kind of like. I'm curious to see if it makes Reinhardt less desirable of a pick, but I think it's still a good setup. Like, where Zarya is the queen of big plays, Reinhardt will remain the king. And that works for me, because Reinhardt's a good frontline tank, he fills that role nicely, you generally want one on your team. Next up, in terms of scope, at least I would say, is Soldier 76. He's been tweaked pretty heavily actually when you start playing him. Basically, his assault rifle is more precise, but the spread comes in a bit faster and a bit more dramatically, it feels. So basically, you want to burst fire, you want to tap fire with him. And it makes him incredibly accurate. Of course, when you're up close, you can just spray and pray. It makes him more versatile, it makes him, the good, medium, to short range fighter that he is. They've added long range damage fall off, which will trim down some of his long range damage threat, especially if they didn't put this in, he would deal more damage over long ranges than he used to, and that would be kind of unfair. That will make him kind of powerful, and he'd start having problems where he basically become Counter-Strike incarnate, where you have a tap firing Soldier 76 just murdering everyone to death. They've also added a new reticle for Soldier 76. I think it's also on Widowmaker's assault rifle as well. It's kind of nice. I would like the ability to customize that, of course. They've said that they'd like to have that feature in there, so maybe sometime in the near future we'll be able to do that. Now, SYMMETRA. SYMMETRA has actually been changed quite dramatically. SYMMETRA's turrets will no longer generate ultimate charge when dealing damage to barriers. That's just a cleanup in my opinion. That should have always been the case, simply because dealing damage to barriers shouldn't give you ultimate charge. That's just not fair. But the teleporter is now much cheaper. She can get it out very quickly, but she can no longer get ultimate charge when her teleporter is active. So this is bringing her in line with changes like the Widowmaker change, for example, where you couldn't get ultimate when you had her ultimate up. And the same applies for SYMMETRA, right? Like, it stops her snowballing almost, where you get the teleporter up and then that extra pressure lets SYMMETRA deal more damage, so then she can get the next teleporter up the moment the first one goes down. It just gives her that little bit extra vulnerability time, makes it a little bit more punishing when the teleporter does go down, and makes it more rewarding to take the teleporter out. So she can get up and running quickly, but she has to work for the next one, basically. I do also want to remind you before you say, oh god, SYMMETRA's been nerfed so much, healing on shields also really brings SYMMETRA up. Like, again, she also, remember, she had 100 health and 100 shields as her hit point pool, so she's now more healable as well, which is kind of nice. On top of giving shields to everyone that might be able to be topped off, again, I need to test this. HANZO changes. HANZO has had some quality of life improvements. Scatter Arrow now has a fixed spread pattern. It used to be slightly random in terms of what it would do. And this is to try and alleviate some of the feeling of what my friend called the lottery arrow, whereas people would just fire scatter arrow hoping that it hit someone and not really aiming it. Now this gives skilled players more agency in using the scatter arrow properly, and might help alleviate some of the feel of people getting just randomly killed by a stray scatter arrow, but I'm sure people will still whine endlessly about HANZO. Sonic Arrow, alongside also getting a new graphic which looks fantastic and is much clearer than the old one, it can now stick and move along with enemy targets and barriers. So basically, if you hit someone with the Sonic Arrow will pulse with them, and that's pretty cool. Dragon Strike, HANZO can turn when using Dragon Strike. This falls in line with the changes that, Reinhardt's had, for example, and Mercy can also now spin in place if she wants when she's rezzing people. HANZO can now sort of readjust and re-aim the Dragon Strike, so it's just a little quality of life change. Quite nice. Pharah, she can no longer sort of stay on top of rooftops. She can no longer refuel while sliding on unwalkable surfaces. This will just stop people staying on rooftops where basically the devs don't want them staying on top of, and they decided to get rid of this simply because it made map making harder, simply because they had to keep in mind that Pharah could basically stay on any sloped surface for any period of time. Now ultimately, let's take a big holistic view at these changes. The real big changes here, again, just to reiterate, are the fact that ultimates no longer get gained from taking damage, and shields can be healed. These are two fundamental changes. These are by far the most important ones. Stationary defense and static defense is a little bit tighter and a little bit stronger with Bastion and TORBJÖRN getting buffed, so I wouldn't be surprised to see them come out more. It also means that I think people are going to need to retrain and relearn how to deal with these static defenses, even more so than they used to, where the turrets are weaker. Basically Bastion and TORBJÖRN are weaker, but they deal more damage and are more potent, in my opinion. It just feels like they're more potent on the battlefield. But handling them is a bit easier, but not as one note, if that makes sense. It's not like you just learn the trick to beating Bastion and then you can beat all Bastions, which used to be the case, where, you just had to find a path behind him, and if you knew the maps and knew how to play, you could always find the path behind him and kill him. Now, it's a little bit more dynamic, but he's easier to deal with from the front, so it's just more well-rounded, better off overall, more useful for the game, where it's not just a binary, do you know how to beat this hero? Okay, you've beaten him, congratulations. Otherwise, there's also 1,000,001 quality of life improvements. There's stuff that isn't in the patch notes, for example, lots of graphical changes just to make it a bit clearer. Lots of sound quotes, so some brilliant dialogue between the heroes at the start of the maps. So for example, Pharah can say things like,
Kids, tech. You should enjoy the classics, like Hasselhoff.
I can't
Reinhardt,
even take you seriously
you know,
right
I
now.
had a poster of you on my wall when I was younger.
She even says to Reinhardt as well, I guess you knew her better, and I'm assuming that's in reference to her mother, who I guess Pharah didn't know that well but always idolized, and Reinhardt worked alongside. There's also the brilliant line of dialogue between Winston and Reaper that I started the episode with. It's so funny that I had to put it in there. Couple of interesting things by their omission. No Tracer nerf, and no Genji nerf. Also no Mei tweaks as well, which is kind of interesting. Mei's visuals are a bit more improved, but other than that, no actual tweaks to her balance. So I'll be curious to see how Tracer, Genji and Mei all pan out in the long term. Basically Tracer a little bit too survivable, Genji again the same, and Mei just obnoxious in so many ways. I'd still like the ability to break her ice block, like give it 1,000 hit points or something, so that if she uses it in the middle of a team and it's just her on her own, then at least there's a way to deal with it and get rid of her. Although looking at Genji and Tracer, you've got to remember also with static defense is going up, static defense is the thing that counters these heroes basically. You know, especially now that if you put a bomb on TORBJÖRN's turret, he gets a free one back, so it's really a waste almost to use the bomb on that now. But you kind of have to do it because you can't, as Tracer, try and harass with a turret just peppering you down. Also, it seems like there's still the ability to contest objectives while immortal. Still don't like that feature, contesting or pushing objectives while immortal. So while in Reaper's Wraith form, while in Zenyatta's Transcendence, while in Mei's Ice Block. Really don't like the fact that that's in there. It stalls things, it doesn't help the game any, it just makes you feel useless. Would really like to see that gone. Alright guys, this has been my quick initial look at the patch changes for the February 9th and their effects on the gameplay. I'll be able to give you a better rundown of this the longer we get to play on it, but this is just my impression where these changes have come from in some ways, how they might affect the state of the game, and where the game is going to go going forward. Now, I will be looking in depth at the cosmetic system and all the ancillary systems around the game, so the score screen, stuff like that, in a couple of moments as well. Hopefully both of these videos will be out around the same time. This one will be up first because I want the gameplay changes out there as those are the most important. I'll also give you something in depth on the new map mode. I'm hoping to talk to one or two of the higher level players I know as well, get their thoughts on it, get their thoughts on maybe how it's going to impact the pro scene, and we're going to see how that goes. Alright guys, thanks for watching. If you have any comments or questions, put them in the comments. I'll try and address them in a follow-up video at some point that I'm hoping to do, simply because I want to see how this pans out. It's going to take a couple of weeks to really see how these changes fully impact the game. Toodles!